Okay, Wildcat, so we're on journal page 14, finding rational solutions of polynomial equations. Steps to find the rational zeros of polynomial functions. Step 1, use the rational zero theorem to find all possible rational zeros. Step 2, use synthetic division to test the possible zeros to find the zero of the rational function. Step 3, factor the polynomial. Step 4, find the remaining zeros. All right, let's take a look at the next page. Finding rational solutions of polynomial equations. Example 1. Find the rational zeros of the polynomial function, then enter the function in the factored form. So the rational zeros can be found by using p divided by q, where p is the factors of the last number and q is the factors of the first number. So we need to find all the factors of -8. So that's plus or minus 1 plus or minus 2. 3 doesn't divide into 8, so that's not a factor. Plus or minus 4. 5 doesn't work. 6 doesn't work. Plus or minus 8. And then we divide it by all the factors of q. Well, the only factor of q is plus or minus 1. Now we divide. Well, 1 divided by 1 is 1. 2 divided by 1 is 2. 4 divided by 1 is 4. And 8 divided by 1 is 8. So one of these factors will be a 0. And to do that, we're going to use synthetic division. Okay, so let's try 1. Now we bring down the 1, the -1, -10, -8. Now, if the remainder is a 0, then it's a factor. So bring down the 1. 1 times 1 is 1. -1 times 1 is 0. 1 and 0 is 0. -10 combined 0 is -10. 1 times -10 is -10. This combines to be -18. So 1 is not a factor. Okay. So now we're just going to try all possible combinations. So we're going to try now -1. Okay. So we bring down the 1, -1, -10, -8. So bring down the 1. -1 times 1 is -1. This combines to be -2. -1 and -2 is +2. -10 and 2 is -8. -1 times -8 is a +8. The remainder is 0. So that means -1 is a factor. So we now know that x equals -1 is one of the factors. Okay. Now, to find the remaining factors, we're going to factor this. Now, this was x cubed, x squared, x. But when you do division, the x is decreased by 1. So this becomes 1x squared minus 2x minus 8. Okay. So we're going to set that equal to 0. Now, we know x squared means two factors. X and x makes x squared. Now, we need to figure out what numbers multiply to give you -8, combined to be -2. So let's start with, now, since the middle number is negative, the bigger number is negative. So 1 times -8 is -8. 1 minus 8 is -7. That doesn't work because we're looking for -8 and -2. So now let's try 2 times -8 is, 2 times -4 is -8. 2 minus 4 is -2. We have our -8 or -2, so that means our factors are x plus 2, x minus 4. I'll put a box around that because we have that. Okay, so now we set each of these equal to 0. X plus 2 equal to 0. X minus 4 equal to 0. So then subtract 2 from both sides. X equals -2. Add 4 to both sides. X equals 4. Okay. So we have our 3 zeros. All right, go ahead and finish up example 1, and let's take a look at example 2. And actually, wait, let me take a step back. The way you can check this is by graphing the original function. So let's do that now. So let's graph x cubed minus x squared minus 10x minus 8. Okay, and we can check -2, -1, and 4, which verifies our answer is correct. Okay, now let's move on to our next example. Okay, example 2, find the rational zeros of the polynomial function, then enter the function in factored form. Okay, so we need to find all the factors of p and all the factors of q, which q is 1. So factors of p are plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 4. 5 doesn't divide into 12, so that doesn't work. Plus or minus 6. 7 doesn't work. 8, 9, so on. Plus or minus 12. And then we find all the factors of q, which are just plus or minus 1. And then we divide. Well, we're just dividing by 1, so that's just plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 4, plus or minus 6, plus or minus 12. Okay? So now we're going to try each of these factors till we get a 0. So let's start with 1. Okay? So then we bring down the 1, 1, -8, -12. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 and 1 is 2. 1 and 2 is 2. -8 and 2 is -6. 1 times -6 is -6. The remainder is -18, so 1 is not a 0. So now let's try -1. So again, we have 1, 1, -8, -12. Okay, bring down the 1. -1 times 1 is -1. 1 minus 1 is 0. -1 and 0 is 0. -8 and 0 is -8. -1 and -8 is +8. -12 and 8 is -4. The remainder is -4, so that's not a 0. So now we try 2. Bring down the 1, 1, -8, -12. Bring down the 1. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 and 2 is 3. 2 times 3 is 6. -8 and 6 is -2. 2 times -2 is -4. That's -16. Remainder, so that doesn't work. So now let's try -2. Okay, bring down the 1, 1, -8, -12. Bring down the 1. That's -2. 1 minus 2 is -1. That becomes a +2. -8 and 2 is -6. -2, that's a +12. Remainder is 0. That means x equals -2 is one of these zeros. Okay, so now we factor. This was, remember, x cubed, x squared, and x. So when you divide, the exponents decrease by 1, so this becomes 1x squared minus 1x minus 6, and we're going to set that equal to 0. Now we need to factor. We know x squared is 2 parentheses. We know that x and x makes x squared. Now we need to find a combination that multiplies to give you -6 combined to be -1. Since the middle number is negative, the bigger number is negative. So let's try 1 times -6 is -6. 1 minus 6 is -5. That doesn't work. Now let's try 2 times -3 is -6. 2 minus 3 is -1. We have our -6 or -1, so our factors are x plus 2, x minus 3. Set those equal to 0, so x plus 2 equal to 0, x minus 3 equal to 0. Subtract 2 from both sides, x equals -2. Add 3 to both sides, x equals 3. So we have our 3 zeros. Now let's go ahead and graph the original equation to verify that's correct. So let's graph x cubed plus x squared minus 8x minus 12. Now you'll see that we have our -2. When it touches and turns like that, that number is a solution twice. That's why we have two negative 2's in our solution, but we have our negative 2 and our 3. All right, go ahead and finish up example 2, and let's take a look at the next example. All right, example 3. Okay, so we need to find all the factors of 210. We know that's plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2. And then let's use Desmos scientific calculator. And so we know 210 divided by 1, that works. 210 divided by 2, that works. 210 divided by 3, that works. So plus or minus 3. 210 divided by 4, that doesn't work. And then 210 divided by 5, that works. So plus or minus 5. Now, my guess is you're not going to want to spend the time to go and write down all those. So we're going to dot, plus or minus 210. Okay, divided by, well, just plus or minus 1. Okay, when you divide, that's plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 5, dot, plus or minus 210. Okay. Now, one of the things you can do to find the first factor is the graph to find the number we want to start with. So we're not going through and trying all of these numbers. So let's go ahead and do that first. So let's go ahead and graph x cubed minus 210x squared minus x plus 210. And so we can use -1 as our number to start with. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So let's start with -1. So then bring down the 1, negative 210, -1, 210. Now, we know that the remainder is going to be a 0 because we know it is 0, but let's make sure. Bring down the 1. -1 times 1 is -1. That becomes -211. That becomes a positive 211. That combines to be positive 210, -210. Remainder is 0. Now, to find the other zeros, remember this was x cubed, this was x squared, and this was x. But when you divide, they reduce by 1, so that becomes 1x squared minus 211x plus 210 equals 0. Okay. Now, to factor 2 parentheses equals 0, we know x and x makes x squared. Now, because the last number is positive, the middle number is negative, both numbers have to be negative. So let's try -1 times -210 equals positive 210. -1 minus 210 is -211. So our factors are x minus 1, x minus 210. Set them equal to 0, x minus 1 equal to 0. The x minus 210 equal to 0. Add 1 to both sides. X equals 1. Add 210 to both sides. X equals 210. Okay, and then almost forgot, x equals -1. Okay, so now let's go back to our graph and verify that we have the correct zeros. Well, we have that verifies a -1, +1, and then we're just going to zoom out. We know we're looking for 210, so we're going to have to zoom out a lot. And there it is, our 210. Okay. All right, let's take a look at the next example. All right, example 4. So we know Q is 1, P is -4, so we need to find all the factors. So that's plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 4, divided by plus or minus 1. So when we divide by 1, that's plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 4. And let's go ahead and graph to start with, so we're not going through all the combinations. Let's start with a 0. So x to the 4th minus 4x cubed plus 3x squared plus 4x minus 4. All right, so let's start with negative 1 because we know that that's a 0. Okay, so negative 1, bring down the 1, bring down the negative 4, bring down the 3, bring down the 4, bring down the negative 4. Okay, now bring down the 1. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. Negative 4 minus 1 is negative 5. Negative 1 times negative 5 is a positive 5. 3 and 5 is 8. Negative 1 and 8 is negative 8. 4 minus 8 is negative 4. Negative 1 times 4 is positive 4, 0. So that verifies x equals negative 1 is one of our zeros. Now, this was x cubed. This was x squared. This is x. Oh, I'm sorry, this is x to the 4th. X cubed, x squared, x. Now, you don't want to, this now becomes x cubed, x squared, x, right? You don't want to factor with x cubed. So we want to do...
Pardon the interruption. At this time, they are taking the 10:30 checkouts in the LGI. Once again, they are taking 10:30 checkouts in the LGI at this time. Thank you.
I apologize for the interruption. I'm making these the last day of school so that I have all the videos made for you at the start of the beginning of this coming up school year. So I apologize for the interruption. That interruption was the teacher checkouts for the last day of school. All right. So we're going to bring down the 1, negative 5, 8, and negative 4. We're going to use synthetic division again to reduce this one more time. And let's go ahead and back to our graph. Let's go ahead and use 1 because we know that's going to work. Okay. So then use 1. We know that the remainder is going to be a 0 because, but we need to reduce it so we can factor, okay, to find the remaining two zeros. So we bring down to 1. 1 times 1 is 1. Negative 5 and 1 is negative 4. 1 and negative 4 is negative 4. 8 minus 4 is 4. 4, remainder is 0. Now, this becomes 1x squared minus 4x plus 4 equal to 0. Remember, because it was cubed squared x, they reduced by 1. So we have x equals 1 as another 0. Okay, now we can factor this, okay, to find the remaining two zeros. So we know x and x is x squared. Okay, now since the last number is positive, the middle number is negative, both numbers have to be negative. So let's try negative 1 times negative 4 is positive 4. Negative 1 minus 4 is negative 5. That doesn't work. So now let's try negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. Negative 2 minus 2 is negative 4. We have our 4, negative 4, so our factors are x minus 2. X minus 2. So we said x minus 2 equal to 0. X minus 2 equal to 0. We add 2 to both sides. X equals 2. We add 2 to both sides. X equals 2. Okay, so now let's go back to our graph and check. Now you'll see that 2 only once, but when it touches and turns, that number counts twice. Okay, but that verifies our zeros are correct. All right, go ahead and finish up that example. And let's take a look at the last example. Okay, so the factors of p are plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 4, divided by plus or minus 1. Divide, that becomes plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 4. And let's go ahead and graph to find the first zero. So that's x to the fourth minus 5x squared plus 4. Okay, so let's use negative 2. Okay, now we bring down the 1. Now there's a problem though. We have to have all of the degrees. So we need to rewrite this as x to the fourth plus 0x cubed minus 5x squared plus 0x plus 4. When using that division, you need to have every exponent represented. So this is 1, 0, negative 5, 0, 4. Okay, now bring down the 1. Now we know that the remainder is going to be 0. If it isn't, then we made a mistake because we know that negative 2 is a 0. Okay, so negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. This combines to be negative 2. Negative 2 and negative 2 is a positive 4. Combines to be negative 1. Negative 2 times negative 1 is a positive 2. This combines to be 2. Negative 2 times 2 is negative 2. Oh, I'm sorry, negative 4. 4 minus 4 is 0. Now remember, this was x to the fourth, x cubed, x squared, x. But when you divide, they reduce by 1. So this becomes x cubed, x squared, x. But we don't want to factor a cube. We want to use syntactic division one more time to reduce it so we can factor squared. Well, let's go back and find another 0. We can use negative 1. Okay? So bring down the 1, negative 2, negative 1, 2. Remember, our remainder is going to be 0 because we know that x equals negative 1 is a 0. Okay? Bring down the 1. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. This combines to be negative 3. That multiplies to be positive 3. That combines to be 2. Negative 2 remainder is 0. So then this becomes 1x squared minus 3x plus 2 equals 0. All right, let's factor. So then that's 2 parentheses equals 0, x and x. Now, since the last number is positive, the middle number is negative, the two numbers need to be negative. So negative 1 times negative 2 is a positive 2. Negative 1 minus 2 is negative 3. Well, that works. So our factors are x minus 1, x minus 2. So x minus 1 equal to 0, x minus 2 equal to 0. Add 1 to both sides, x equals 1. Add 2 to both sides, x equals 2. Okay, so let's double check to make sure those are all correct. They are. All right, go ahead and finish up the example. Start working on your assignment and have a wonderful Wildcat day.